Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bolton of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals to state senators to mayors to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about. As part of our series on how government can get shit done, today we talk to Marc Dunkelman. He's the author of Why Nothing Works, Who Killed Progress, and How to Bring It Back. Dunkelman brings an important perspective on the competing strands within progressivism, that of process and transparency versus delivering results for communities in need. We talk about those historical trends, what that means now, and how progressives can reclaim government in order to deliver results for our constituents. Enjoy. Professor Marc Dunkelman, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
I'm thrilled to be here.
Let's start. We are here talking about your book, Why Nothing Works. I've read it over the last week. It's fast-paced. It's got amazing information, and it explains very well why nothing works. Let's tell our listeners, why is nothing working? And I should note, you started this well before the Trump administration, the second Trump administration. So nothing's been working for a while.
Yeah, this is a 10-year project. Exactly right.
So tell us, why does nothing work?
I mean, the core of the argument of the book is that progressives, who for decades really wanted to empower government to solve big problems, and did that for several decades, in the 60s and 70s realized that the establishment that they themselves had empowered to solve these problems was doing things they didn't like. That people like Robert McNamara were sending us into a quagmire in Southeast Asia, that we were doing urban renewal, that Robert Moses was plowing down whole portions of New York City in order to build highways, that agricultural regulators were allowing big ag to spray DDT on crops and creating lots of birth defects. That there were just all these examples of big government doing bad. And so progressives themselves turned on government at that moment, and for decades has been trying to find ways to check government so that it doesn't do bad things. And we've done such a good job of that over the course of the last 50 years, we've really made it so that government can't maneuver and can't solve problems. And so it's a nuance within progressive thinking that most progressives aren't even aware of, let alone other people. And so the impetus behind the book is to say progressives have these two sort of competing impulses within them, and we need to figure out the right balance of the two.
Yeah, and in the book, you make the compelling case that when you give everybody a veto, even well-meaning folks who are trying to solve problems inevitably use that veto to slow things or stop things. And then you tie it into aligning with the conservatives, who also have a distrust of big government. And we saw this in airline deregulation, where the right and the left combined in order to really reduce airlines. And as a result, flying is harder for everybody. I guess from the progressive side, what do you see as finding the balance between the Jeffersonian and the Madisonian approaches to governance?
I mean, well, this is the challenge. I think this is the core challenge for progressives today and for everyone. You're absolutely right. To like in housing policy, to the degree that conservatives represent sort of the high net worth, fancy places, and that progressives represent more marginal communities. Neither community wants more housing, right? People in high, in very fancy neighborhoods don't want the riffraff moving in, and so they're afraid of multifamilies being built there. People in poor neighborhoods don't want to be gentrified. And both communities tend to use the same tools that progressives created to stop more housing from being created in each place. And so the question is, how do you set, to your question is, how do you set some sort of balance so that bad projects can't get started, but good ones can? And like, I think that's sort of a perennial question for us. Clearly, we've overstepped in the attempt to stop bad projects from happening. We've got too many vetoes in the system. But you don't want to have no vetoes either. Like we have a history in this country of having allowed powerful figures to bulldoze communities without them having an opportunity to weigh in, and we don't want that. So you're absolutely right. The solution to me, and it varies from realm to realm and probably from place to place, is you want to give everyone a voice without a veto. So people who don't want the housing built near them, don't want a high-speed rail built, through their neighborhood, don't want a transmission line built near their child's school, all those people should have a voice. They should be able to access the people who are ultimately going to decide whether the line, the transmission wire, the housing development moves forward. You don't want to shut them out completely, but you do want to give discretion to someone in the public realm who can weigh those local concerns against the broader concern, the broader public interest of whether we need that rail line, that transmission line to get clean energy, that housing, so the housing costs aren't so exorbitant. We need to return power to someone so that they can weigh and ratify these trade-offs.
Can I ask, so when you return power to someone, it can be at the federal level, it can be at the state level, it can be the local level. Reading your book, I was thinking, maybe we just need to devolve power back to the states, back to localities. It'll create really uneven applications of public policy, but it feels hard to give more power to the federal government right now, whether you're progressive or otherwise. Where do you think these decisions are best made? What level of government?
So I don't have a strong feeling about that, right? If you're talking about housing, you don't want the decision to be made at the neighborhood level, because the neighborhood is always against new housing, right? Like they don't want change. They bought into the neighborhood. They expected it to stay the way it was. They claim, I bought in this suburb because I knew that there would be some number of houses, that this would how the school would work. I don't want more people. In that case, probably the person who owns a plot of land and wants to turn their single family home into a duplex or to build an accessory dwelling unit, a granny flat sometimes, like there you can push power down to the individual person so that they can build the house. And that's probably the most expeditious solution. That's what YIMBYism is sort of all about, is taking power away from the neighborhood and pushing it down. In other cases, though, like if you're going to build a transmission line, say you had a lot of clean power being generated in Quebec, as it is being generated by water power, by dams. They have a lot of power, and Massachusetts wants to buy that power, but Massachusetts doesn't sit next to Quebec. There are states in between. There, like the question is, should Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, New York have a veto over whether Massachusetts can access that power? Or should we empower somebody to weigh the costs and benefits of whether we should build that line? That yes, if a new line is built, it's going to go through some forest. That forest is going to have a line through it. There may be an endangered species of orchid that might be in peril if you build the line. But someone needs to make the decision: is taking the equivalent of 700,000 pollutant emitting cars off the road worth building a line through an orchid sanctuary? And I'm not sure that can be done at the local level. It may be that Maine is more interested in the orchids than they are in Massachusetts' power grid. And so there, I would sort of argue we probably should have a federal permitting process. So it goes from realm to realm. The point in all these cases is that someone needs to be empowered to be the decision maker, right? Right now, whether it's at the local level, the state level, the federal level, it doesn't matter. There are too many opportunities for people who don't like an idea to veto it, right? To take it to court, to threaten to take it to court, to find some sort of procedural glitch that means that like a well-intentioned clearly purposefully a project that clearly has a public purpose and would benefit everyone is taken down because one person has a self-interested reason that they don't like it. And we just need to balance those things. It's not that people who have self-interest are bad. It's not that they shouldn't be able to advocate for themselves. It's that they shouldn't be empowered to decide everything. And you need to be able to balance those two. The problem for progressives today is that we've grown so enamored of the idea that there can be some procedure that will take care of all the interest. That if you go through every step of some procedure, it's almost like on Bachelorette, right? Like trust the process. Well, you can't. Like the truth is here, you can't trust the process. You're not like the process favors the people who want to stop the project, and we need to create a system where there is someone with a public interest in mind who has the discretion to choose.
Yeah. And I will say, as a former elected official and advising new elected officials, there's always a temptation in hard decisions. Well, let's just have another meeting about it. Let's just have another public outreach. And at some point, someone has to decide. And in fact, often having those 2, 3, or 4 public outreach meetings actually just makes people more angry, because now they've invested time, they've gotten babysitters, they've come to meetings, and they show up, and then you end up still voting against them, but now you've just taken more of their time after they've made really good arguments for why you should or shouldn't do something. What have we learned from the second Trump administration, who seems to be making decisions, blowing through both laws, norms, processes, etc., about the capacity of government to make decisions quickly when it's willing to?
Well, I think we don't know exactly what we've learned, right? You're absolutely right that he is blowing through norms and making decisions that it seems he may not be able to make. And we're in the early stages, so that the courts, in many cases, are probably going to strike down things that are clearly unconstitutional, that things that the Congress has not authorized him to do. Like we've got a whole bunch of bumps in the road here. So I think there are two things here. One, I want to say, like, the progressive response to Doge has too often been to be reflexively against anything Elon Musk did. And I don't think that's not me endorsing what he's done. But, when he asked everyone in the federal workforce to justify what they've done over the course of the last week, like, that's actually a pretty reasonable request that people on the public who are living off the public dime should be able to report in, like, what they've accomplished over the course of the previous 7 days. Like most people in the private sector have to do that. And like, maybe it's not the most expeditious use of their time. And certainly it was not done in the spirit of wanting to necessarily improve the government, right? It was done as the pretenses, I'm going to fire you. But like, most people in the private sector are accustomed to having to justify their employment to their employer, right? Like if you're if you're working at a body shop and you haven't actually fixed the cars that have come in that are on your line, like, you're not going to come back the next week, right? Like, and the same mentality should apply even if you're a federal worker and you've got various civil service protections. Like the notion that you were there to serve the public and that you need to justify, like, Democrats and progressives shouldn't be against that as a notion. So like, like, there are certain things that Doge did that were beyond the pale, but like, the spirit of wanting to reform government, to make government more efficient, to make it more effective, to get it going, to move it so that it is accomplishing things rather than just being obsessed in process, like, that should be our perspective on these things. Like the sort of notion that we should be reflexively against reform of government, like, that's politically dangerous and like not wise. The second thing I'd say about what we've learned from the second Trump administration is that when government doesn't work, progressives come out behind, right? That the fundamental fact is, like, there's been innumerable op-eds and arguments and comments online about why Democrats lost the 2024 election. And like, I'm sure it's a combination of lots of things. But fundamentally, if government doesn't work and Democrats are the party of government, like, that's a tough political road to hoe, right? For us. And so I understand that, like, we want to talk about the outrageous things that Trump's done, or the way he's abused government and autocracy and the end of democracy and racism and xenophobia and all the things that are coming. But, like, fundamentally, if government was working in a way that satisfied citizens, they wouldn't be so inclined to vote for this maniac, right?
Yeah.
He is responding to a public disgust with the institutions of government. And it is our job to deliver to people a government that they like, trust, understand, and I think fundamentally understand that the government is going to have to make tough decisions. We shouldn't be afraid of those. So the fundamental lesson that I take from these first few weeks is, if we don't get our ducks in a row, people are going to look elsewhere for solutions, and they've looked to Trump. This has been his public profile for well before the presidency. Like, when he was just a developer in New York, he played this same game, fixing things where government wasn't performing. I tell a story about a skating rink in the book, but, like, I want Democrats, like, to the degree that this is a podcast that reaches Democrats and Democratic elected officials, if we're not creating government that serves in a way that people like, we're going to get more Trump-like figures. Like this, like Trump, we are to a large degree culpable for the Trump phenomenon because we have not delivered.
Yeah. And in the book, you have this painful story of an ice rink in New York City that can't get rebuilt, got rebuilt, doesn't work, needs to get rebuilt. And then, Donald Trump swoops in and saves the day. And it is, I mean, to your point, if you don't figure out how to do it, and someone is at least perceived as being able to do it, it creates a real political problem. But let me just ask, because, being from California, and housing policy is, and it's something we've lived through and experienced, and see the impacts every day. But aligning the progressive side, meaning environmentalists and labor and other groups that all use environmental law as a way to have power in the system, is extremely hard to then take away the power. It's one thing to take away power from, large auto manufacturers or other big organizations. It's really hard to take away power from workers and from environmentalists and from other key component base of the progressive side. How do you make that argument? Have you seen any instances that we can point to a success?
Yeah. So, I mean, the housing is a little bit of an outlier, I think, in this whole effort to reform government. Some people put it under Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson have this terrific book, Abundance, that's called the abundance movement. Some people are using that term. I'm not totally bought into that as a framework, but it's a terrific book and a terrific contribution. Housing is an outlier because in that case, the question is, who should get to choose what gets built? And presently in California, there are ways to use environmental law, CEQA, various other zoning laws, to say the neighborhood, the people who live around a project, should have a great deal of impact in deciding what's built on any given plot of land. If it's a larger project, you're absolutely right. Like the unionized labor, in some cases, if the federal government is participating as a Buy America provision, which raises the cost of material. There are all sorts of sort of pile on of requirements. The YIMBY movement, which is sort of part of abundance, but sort of raced ahead of the other parts of it. The basic calculation that they've come to is that if you buy a plot of land, you should be able to build what you want to build on that plot, regardless of all these other things. So it's taking away the power that all these interests have so that the owner of the land can build And like the market conditions in California, like housing is so expensive that if you build more housing, it's almost surely going to be purchased or rented at probably very profitable rates. So like the market there should, take away these restrictions, the market would produce more housing. Like this is you could use the market, and like there are cases where the market doesn't work, like electrification in rural area. Like there are places where government needs to step in. In this case, the market would work if we just got all these barriers out of the way. And so the solution to the question you asked, which is like you've got interests, environmental interests, regional interests, neighborhood interests, labor interests that would stop a project. The solution that in many cases with this YIMBY outlook is to say, forget all that. If you own the property, you should be able to do what you want. Like that doesn't mean that you don't have to build a certain specifications, et cetera, et cetera. But the general notion is like the person who owns the property should decide. That is so like that's the political calculus and the policy approach. That doesn't work in other realms of public policy. That doesn't work with railroad tracks. It doesn't work with power lines. It doesn't work in other sorts of realms. I also want to say, like, we don't want to make it so that labor has no voice.
Right.
We don't want to make it so that, people can buy substandard materials from overseas and put them in houses that have carcinogens in them, right? Like we want to maintain certain standards, and we want in my view, we want the neighborhood to at least have some ability to say to someone, I don't want more housing in my neighborhood, right? Like I bought here in Santa Cruz or in San Jose or in San Francisco with the expectation that this neighborhood would stay, right? You don't want that person to feel as though there is some, man out, sort of distant man that they can't speak to, who's going to make these decisions. You don't want to make them feel disempowered,
yeah.
But you do want to give them, you want to give them some opportunity to voice their concerns.
Which I think leads me to my next question, which is a book you actually wrote 10 years ago. That's even more prescient today, I think, which is this idea of the vanishing neighbor and the lost community, which is ultimately power can come from trust. But if we don't trust each other, and if we don't trust our elected official, whether it's a mayor or state legislator or president, it makes it really hard to do anything. Can you talk a little bit about why you wrote that book? You had been in government, and you could talk about transmission lines, big national public policy issues. Instead, you focused on community, and how you think from the 10 years since the book has been published to now, you've seen this impacting public policy today.
Yeah. So I've been involved in like the sort of the New Deal world from before New Deal. So Debbie Cox, Bolton, and I worked for an organization back in the day that still exists. That then it was called the Democratic Leadership Council. It had a think tank that still exists now called the Progressive Policy Institute. And we would get together. I mean, this is now 15, 20 years ago, in the purple room of our little office there, which was the conference room, every week, and to discuss the political shenanigans of the moment. And in each, it was sort of, I sort of noticed over the course of time that the complaints among the sort of the thinkers in that room about why politics was broken, why things weren't working as well as they had worked during the Clinton administration in particular. People don't always remember this, but like by the time Bill Clinton left office, not only did we have a budget surplus, but like faith in government was up. Like it's sort of a remarkable achievement. Is that the Clinton years saw people have faith in government, but this was now, 10, 15 years after that. And, what had changed, and like there were sort of a series of frequent culprits. People blamed money in politics, people were in gerrymandering, people blamed special interests. And what I sort of was noticing was that all the things that people were blaming for what this change was, like sort of almost over the course of a decade, all predated, right? Like Clinton's era, certainly, the New Deal or the Great, like going back, like gerrymandering is literally named after Elbridge Gerry, who was James Madison's vice president. So like that's not a new phenomenon. Like that can't explain the new right. Like the money in politics. Like just read Robert Caro on LBJ in the early days of the productive his productive use of the independent oil money as a cudgel to use to sort of push through very progressive legislation in the 50s and even into the 60s. These are not new things. So I approached that book came out in 2014, so 2011 2012, what really has changed in America? And the solution that I came to, or the explanation that I came to, that was sort of at the root cause of all these changes, was that social capital, which people who have read Bowling Alone understand as sort of like how much connection do we have to the people around us, isn't exactly like it's not like the temperature where it goes up or down. It's that each of us have our own agency, our own time and attention, sort of a fund of time and attention. We can invest it in different sorts of relationships, and that Americans had over the course of the previous 50 years begun to invest more of their time in their most personal relationships, so the 10 or 12 people that they love most, their spouse, their children, their parents, their best friends. And they've been investing a lot of time in relationships with people who they don't know very well at all. So people who share a common interest in a football team or in a hobby or whatever it is, people that you'd see on Twitter, right? Like you might not even know if you were passing them in the grocery store, but like you have a pretty deep relation with them because you both hate the Cowboys or whatever it is. What had been lost in that wash were the sorts of relationships that used to define community. So the people that you knew because you always saw them at the PTA meeting, or you always saw them at Sunday at church, or you always saw them at the same coffee shop. People that you knew, a familiar but not intimate relationship, where you were often exchanging information and ideas. You were seeing the world through their eyes because, something was happening. They were building a new highway nearby or a new housing development. And you would hear their complaints or their excitement or whatever it was, and you'd be able to see the world through their eyes. And so that when there was opposition to your own idea, like someone was supporting something you didn't understand, you didn't like, you could at least understand the other point of view. In the absence of what I would call those middle ring relationships, in the absence of those relationships, people were less inclined to accept opposition. Right, they were sending to their city council, to the state legislature, to Congress, people who they thought would fight with undying fervor for their point of view, rather than saying, we got a problem. There isn't enough housing, but I don't want it in my neighborhood. Where can it go? Could I accept some housing here and some housing there, so it's not disruptive here or not too disruptive here, or like the sort of notion that we were going to solve a problem communally across difference dissipated as we had fewer experiences in our own lives with people who had different points of view. So that was the argument of that book in 2014. And you're absolutely right that the thing that I'm focused here on this second book, Why Nothing Works, is how do you create structures? How do you think about creating institutions that people can have faith are going to take, their voice, all the voices, think about them, weigh the choices, and then have someone make a decision, even though they know that's going to be unpopular with some subset of the population. Because ultimately that, like the bridge across the river has to be built somewhere. And if there is housing on both sides of the river, up and down both shores, like that means that someone's house is going to have to be condemned so that, you can put the foundation for the bridge there. And that person is not going to be happy. There's no way to build the bridge without having to condemn someone's house. So someone is going to object. Right now, we just don't have a system that allows us to weigh those, to weigh the different possibilities, and to sort of say, you're the unlucky fellow, you're the unlucky family that's going to have your house condemned. You're going to have to move. You're going to get paid, you got a constitutional guarantee that the government is not going to take from you without compensating you. But you're not going to like that. And it just can't be that everybody on both sides of the river has the power to say no to the bridge if everyone on both sides of the river would benefit from the connection.
It makes me wonder if you combine the two, if you sort of say, look, we are going to streamline, improve, if the project builds community, right? And the example of the restroom in San Francisco that cost too many years to build. But if you don't have a restroom in a park, people aren't going to take their kids to the park. They're not going to build community in the park. And so maybe as a first baby step to get to make things work, you start saying, look, if there's a broader community impact and the project can show it, we'll streamline this decision making. We'll speed this up. We won't have to do the ACE study of whatever it is that people claim.
I mean, I often like to take this out of the realm of politics and sort of relate it to people's ordinary lives. Like I'm married. I have 2 daughters. Frequently, my wife and I both work on a Friday night. Right? She'll get home. I'll be home. We're both exhausted. The kids are, tired from a long week at school. Nobody wants to cook. And so someone will suggest, maybe we should just go out to dinner tonight. Right? And so now you've got, one of my kids who are 8 and 11, like you've got 4 really different ideas about where we should go to dinner, right? Like, like one kid is, it's Shake Shack or bust. The other one only wants to eat fried chicken sandwiches at fancy restaurants. My wife wants to eat, whatever weird vegetarian thing that she likes, unseasoned quinoa, whatever. It's a, and like the question is like, how do you decide, the 4 of us, where we're going to eat? Should everyone get to choose one consent, right? So that you're going to Shake Shack every fourth Friday. Should it be that like the parents, who presumably know what is healthy for the kids, should get to choose every time and they have no voice in the matter at all? Should it be that we vote, in which case, my wife would always get voted off the island, right? Because nobody wants to go to her weird vegetarian, but like should it be, so should it be that everyone can throw out an objection, everyone can throw out an idea, but anyone else can veto it? Now, in that situation, like, it's not like parents know, like there are intense politics involved here, right? Like
Sure.
Particularly if the 2 daughters don't want the other one to get what they want. I mean, right? Like there's a lot of political shenanigans that can go into that decision. But ultimately, you will come to a decision because no one wants to starve that night, right? Like everybody wants to eat. In politics, we need a system, sort of like you need to think like, how are we going to choose where the bridge is going to be built? How are we going to choose where the transmission line is going to be constructed? But we don't have we don't have the immediate impact of going to bed hungrier. Like that is not sort of in our own frame of mind, sort of a likely consequence. So like in the end, like, we will figure it out. Now, all families will find some system that works for them, hopefully, right? There may be yelling and screaming, like no one may talk to each other at dinner, but like ultimately they will eat.
Yeah.
In politics, we have not figured that out. And what I sort of like to argue, particularly for progressives who are afraid of offending this interest group or that interest group, like ultimately someone's going to be angry. They're not going to want their house condemned. They're not going to want the high-speed rail thing to traverse their main street. They're not going to want the noise from the new thing to impact. They're not going to want their view of the bridge to be impacted by a new housing development. All of these things, but ultimately, like the thing that we need to do, the thing that progressives need to do, is to make sure that everyone eats. Right, like to get to a decision where we get to a restaurant that is at least marginally healthy on Friday night when everyone's hungry. And in the absence of that, like people are going to vote for Donald Trump, right? Like if we're not going to step up and actually make these decisions and create a system where, where government is able to perform, people are going to look for, I mean, I'm not sure what sort of language I can use on a podcast.
Any
like
kind
this.
you want.
Yeah. But there's some maniac, some asshole, right? Like that's going to just, you guys aren't going to decide how it's going to be built. I'll do it. That is the core of Trump's appeal. Like even when he's saying these offensive things, the reason that it's not politically poisonous for him is because it's a signal to voters. Look, the deep state, the bureaucracy isn't working for you. I'm going to make these decisions and we're just going to get this thing done. I'm a CEO. I get the right. Like that's the core of his appeal. We need not to be assholes. We need to create a system whereby government can actually perform and make decisions. And we haven't gotten there yet.
I love that. And that brings up three reactions. First, I have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, and it only gets more intense. And there are many times when I wonder if it's more important for people to win the argument or for the other people or the other side to lose, the other child to lose. And it's a fundamental human thing. But I also think the other part that I think helps with this is, in my experience, 16 years in local government making decisions, is many of the decisions that were the end of the world for a group of people, by the time they got built, it's fine. It's like people adapt, people end up liking it. We had stores go in that people were like, this is terrible, this and that. And then 3 or 4 years later, you see them in the store that they had opposed in their neighborhood. But that ultimately, you're right. Like you have to deliver, you have to get something done, and you can't be seen to be stuck in a never ending process where people are continually funding it, right? Like all these processes and studies and community meetings and reports all cost taxpayer dollars, and people aren't seeing the result of their investments.
I mean, Jerusalem Dempsey of the Atlantic has written really beautifully about this, but like this sort of notion is that, there's an empty plot of land in your neighborhood and someone wants to build a fourplex on it, and the people in the neighborhood are worried about, who's going to move in. There aren't enough seats in the local school. So, but they raise a series of objections. There's a limited electricity in the grid. There's limited capacity in the sewer system. Like they create a series of objections. And then once someone fights through that, and like there are 4 more homes, and like the new residents in your neighborhood are not theoretically, but they're actually like your 6-year-old's best friend lives in one of those homes, and like suddenly there are more people in the local elementary school, and like that turns out to be great because like at the time like there were too few, or now there's enough. This happens enough, and there are a bunch of new restaurants around because like there's more foot traffic in the neighborhood, or suddenly like the transit administration isn't going to send an extra bus, and now fewer people need to have cars. In the end, people often like density, and she's absolutely right about it. That being said, we also know that like if you've purchased like a fancy apartment in a high rise and it has a view of the Bay Bridge or of the Golden Gate Bridge or whatever it is, and someone wants to build a building that blocks that view, like you're going to have a legitimate objection to that, right? Like you spent a lot of money on this apartment, like you purchased it for a premium, and now it's probably going to be sold for a loss. Like someone has had a major effect on your nest egg. And like, that's not something that we can sort of dismiss as, well, I mean, some in our world say tough patooties, right? Like that's the risk and nothing you can do. My view is like we should have some sympathy for people because they see that happen to someone else, and the larger population is like, yikes, could that happen to me? Could something be done to my neighborhood to drop property values, et cetera, et cetera? Probably in California, that's less of an issue. Like you could add a lot of housing. It's not going to, but like, let's not dismiss the possibility. Like it's happened in American history that things have changed in housing markets and people's values. Like it just happened, 15 years ago. A little longer with the housing crisis. So I don't think we should be dismissive of those things. What we do need is to have some sort of process that everyone can subscribe to. This is not to take you into your college days or your listeners into their college days when we were all reading John Rawls and not really understanding what it means. But he has this concept of a veil of ignorance, that you should build a public policy on the assumption that you were if you were born into the world again, you wouldn't know whether you're going to be born in the affluence of American society or in the dire poverty of the developing world. And so you would want to build public policies around that notion. I think in this case, just in the United States, we should be creating processes where there's a veil of ignorance. You don't know how the ultimate solution will end up. It may be that the bridge construction requires your house to be condemned. It may be that the bridge construction is 10 miles north and your house will be fine. The question is, with that, not knowing what is the process we would all endorse to come to a decision about where the bridge is going to be. So that when in the end, it's not what you wanted, you at least feel like, well, I got a fair shot. My objections were heard. They were taken seriously, and this is the outcome. Because right now, the notion is anytime progressives get a decision they don't like, their notion is, oh, the process wasn't fair, right? The developers told us that someone had their finger in government. This is a corrupt deal between the mayor and so, and like, well, let's see where the campaign donations went, or didn't they ignore the environmental implications and we're going to take them to court over the corruption, or because they didn't follow the process, or whatever it is. Like, that is the thing that is that is holding us back. It's the reason that we don't have enough housing. It's the reason we don't have enough infrastructure. It's the reason we haven't taken advantage of the clean energy revolution. It's that mentality. And so, like, the thing that I would hope Democrats in particular would take away from this book is that we need to create processes that are fair, and that people view as fair, like this, and like currently the sort of endless procedure doesn't work because we don't get to a conclusion. But also, like, there's lots of people who don't feel as though the procedures are actually an avenue for them to have their voice heard, right? Like, pick a big project. Like, there are lots of people who would like to be able to get to the person who's ultimately going to make the decision, but the person who's ultimately going to make the decision, because it's also legal, is some judge who's hearing something on a slight, on a arcane question of whether the process, by considering the environmental implications, were people are not going to be able to speak up there, but like ultimately that judge is the power broker. And we should look for an alternative as often as we can to that sort of arcane labyrinth of process that serves almost no one.
Yeah, I think that's a great insight, and it's it's the quality of the arguments of your book is a recognition that, as you say, like, each public policy is different, outcomes are different. We don't want to just set process up to get the outcome we want. We actually want to have a legitimate process, because we are balancing these two traditions in a way that I think, from a common sense, and most Americans want. They want a fair process. They also want something done at the end of the day. And I appreciate your efforts to inform us that this is not an entirely new phenomenon, and it's going to take some time to unravel and rebalance. But you've done it incredibly thoughtfully in your book, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.